Hi everyone, RFG here with my impressions for a bunch of game demos I've played available from the latest Steam NextFest. Some of these games were already on my wishlist, so I was already interested in them, but there was a good amount that caught my attention browsing through the NextFest pages. This list isn't really made with a particular order in mind. These are all games that looked interesting to me in some way, so they aren't ranked in terms of excitement level or anything like that. These are supposed to just be general impressions. I'm also not going to go too deep into game mechanics here, since these are demos I do expect things to change, but I will try to give you a quick rundown of how much I played or how much content is available in them. These are all also works in progress, so my takes here can also change when these games are fully released. I guess I should also mention that most of these games don't have an official release date, but I do point out ones that do. And lastly, if you do find interest in any of the games on this list, make sure to add them to your wishlist. Empyreal was a game that I recently added to my wishlist before NextFest. It's an action RPG dungeon crawler being developed by Silent Games. Unlike a lot of other dungeon crawlers, this doesn't use a top-down or isometric view and gives you a controllable third-person camera. You have access to 3 weapon classes, the glaive, a mason shield combo, and a cannon. The 3 weapon types generally do feel different from each other, and while the glaive felt pretty easy to figure out on its own, I would recommend training with the other weapon types before getting into the monolith dungeon, especially for the cannon. Your equipment in the demo comes in presets that do a pretty good job of highlighting the differences in weapon types, and after beating the first floor I tried, I unlocked 3 other late game presets. Equipment level determines your character level, so it makes it pretty easy to tell what late game gear is. As for the combat, overall it felt kind of stiff or rigid, but the attack options themselves felt pretty varied depending on the equipment loadout. The dungeon floors were also surprisingly different, and some looked really good. I was able to unlock more floors for play by completing previous ones, so there's a good bit of life in the demo itself, and there's plenty of room for exploration in them to find items and chests. The hub area is a pretty good size, and there are a number of NPCs to interact with. Some of these NPCs are also voice acted, which I can see people appreciating. The character creator isn't super robust, but does allow for a decent amount of customization for the preset selections. From what I played, it feels like it could be a fairly large project. I'm not too sold on the combat yet, but there could be something I was missing by not messing around with some of the available and dropped equipment, though I do think it's something to look forward to. Yes, Your Grace Snowfall is a medieval management sim RPG developed by Brave at Night. I'm not particularly into these kind of management and sim games, but the RPG mechanics and nice pixel art caught my attention. And partway through the very detailed and long introduction, I had to look up to see if Yes, Your Grace Snowfall was a standalone title or not, and indeed it isn't. The first Yes, Your Grace was released in 2020, and even though Snowfall is a sequel, I couldn't really find a mention of this in the info on the Steam store page. I was considering to just stop playing when the game asked me about my decisions in the previous game, but there's also an option to sort Snowfall with presumed choices. So is Yes, Your Grace Snowfall the game to get me to fully invest into management sims? No, probably not, but there are some things that I did enjoy my time within the demo. For starters, its pixel art style is really good, and it is improved from what I saw in some footage and screens of the previous game. And even though I got lost in the intro, the demo started me off in a position that was pretty easy to understand. The interface may look simple, but that doesn't mean I can't get detail when necessary. Yet what really kept me playing were some of the conversation options. One of my favorite things was giving a character a specific nickname, and the game keeping track of that later on. The demo was keeping a steady pace at introducing its mechanics and didn't feel overbearing, so I don't think anyone who hasn't played the first game should have trouble starting with Snowfall. Mechaknights Legends, developed and published by Aethermancer, is a combat-focused tactical action game. Their info page lists a lot of features, but the demo itself was pretty bare bones. It features a tutorial for its controls and a fight against a dragon with slightly different win conditions, so the practicality of what attacks are best used and when are mostly for you to figure out. The store page says there will be a large amount of customization that'll be offered, but the demo features only one mech with no options. I don't want to give it too much of a hard time for a lack of demo features, because the game's combat actually feels really good. There's a real weight to the feel of the mech when it does pretty much anything, and the use of the camera for the most part adds to that effect. Its 2 main flaws I could see in the combat is its terrible camera placement or angle when you're sprinting, and the heat mechanic not having any drawbacks since you can release built up heat no matter what you're doing. I'm still looking forward to seeing more of the game, but part of me does wish they would show it off so they could showcase more features for the demo. Fretless, The Wrath of Riffson is a turn-based RPG with some real-time battle mechanics under development by Ritual Studios, where your main weapon is an acoustic guitar, but one of the things that impressed me is just how much they decided to display in the demo. It starts you off at the beginning of the adventure, but by the end of the demo you have access to a new weapon which has added mechanics, and that's on top of the upgrade system, multiple bosses, and 2 pretty full dungeon areas. The musical theming is constant, but also doesn't feel like it's just a gimmick. Almost everything regarding the combat and upgrades are music or instrument related, and if the real-time battle mechanics concern you, it can be adjusted to be more or less lenient for you. For those who are interested in the story, it seems pretty lighthearted, but there are twists already present in the demo, and I'm pretty down for it. If I didn't already have it on my wishlist, the demo would have been a strong case to add Fretless to it. Coral in the Abyss is a top-down action-adventure game that will have RPG elements and some specific Souls-like traits. It's in development by Intriguely Games and looks to try to build upon their previous game, Inside the Crystal Mountain. You start off with the basic mid-range attack module that you can charge for an AoE attack, and you can gain long-range attack modules with a bit of exploration. All of these can be aimed 360 degrees around your character. There are eyes that you can collect that I think will be the currency or XP system in Coral in the Abyss, but I didn't see anywhere they could be used. And besides the other attack modules, there are some other things to find. There were a handful of different types of enemies that came across along the 2 accessible areas you can work your way through, but this does seem to be right at the start of the game, so it's a little bit difficult to tell how much variety there will be. While the demo itself isn't that long, the 2D graphics and gameplay are fairly solid. You have access to 1 heal, a dash, and fast travel from the start. The unexplored map makes it seem like there's a good amount of area to explore, so I wouldn't mind seeing more later on. Redemption of Liuyin is a third-person action RPG from King Na Game, and from what I've played in the demo, is a full third-person remake of Nine Treasures of Liuyin, an isometric action RPG I reviewed and enjoyed last year. There are some minor improvements besides a new controllable camera, and there looks to be some bits added to its campaign, but if the isometric camera from Nine Treasures didn't appeal to you, then I think the control of a third-person camera of Redemption probably can. If you want a breakdown of a lot of Redemption's demo gameplay, you can check my review for Nine Treasures of Liuyin, as most of its mechanics still applies, but overall Redemption feels just as fun and fast-paced as its counterpart, and even in this demo, offers a decent challenge and some replayability, just like Nine Treasures. I still don't think it should have a Souls-like tag. If anything, I feel like that does more to hurt its attraction than it would help it, but I definitely recommend giving it a try if you're looking for a more traditional ARPG. Some of the demo tutorial controls were slightly off, but it's something you can overcome. This actually releases really soon, so let me know what you think. If I had to describe Nitro Express by Garfax Software in one word, it would be manic. I think a 2D side-scrolling arcade-style shooter already gives the impression of fast-paced action, but Nitro Express upgrades that pace into turbo. The demo itself doesn't offer much in length, just a fairly quick but thorough tutorial and 1 story level, but you have a large selection of weapons at your disposal to choose from, and what feels like a minigame section when starting that story level. Humor is in abundance here, and there is a sense of goofiness to the craziness of everything that's happening at almost all times in this demo, but it's all pretty entertaining and just fun. There are a few problems that I do want to point out though that hopefully won't persist in the full release. The game is incredibly fast paced, but it was locked to 30 FPS, which in a game with this much happening really should allow for a faster frame rate, and aiming occasionally feels jarring when switching from one side to the other. Aside from those things, I think anyone interested in a side-scrolling platformer shooter that's just fun has something to look forward to. Aethermancer has so many things involved in its demo that I think trying to say anything too specific could make it sound overwhelming, but most of its mechanics feel like they're introduced in a reasonable time frame. Being developed by Moai Games, at its base, Aethermancer is a roguelike creature collector turn-based RPG. While the combat itself is full of death, with multiple stacks of effects, keeping track of elemental aether that supplies your creature's attacks, a corruption effect that needs to be kept track of to maximize the creature's life in the biome, etc., and that's not counting some of the trainer abilities, but the thing I enjoyed most was how smooth the exploration and how traversal mechanics felt. The Aethermancer is very agile, and being able to dash, jump onto and off of cliffs, reacting to an enemy for a preemptive attack before a battle, all make me appreciate how much Aethermancer offered in the traversal sense. You even get convenient fast travel options in a zone. Again, there is a lot of depth in the combat, and often I did feel like there's a lot of stuff happening just in one creature's turn, but I felt explanations were paced well enough to go over what's been happening when it's effective, although some things probably should get explained earlier than they did. I haven't really played a creature collector battle RPG in years, but Aethermancer is one of my most anticipated games, and I think part of that is how few games there are that blend well-made traversal mechanics into games with a turn-based battle system to this degree. Scarlet Lake is an isometric survival horror game being developed by Nocturnal Interactive that's inspired by early classics in the genre, but it does feature 360-degree aiming around your character and allows you to upgrade your weapons with money and parts you can find scattered throughout the demo. The demo itself isn't too long, with you getting a fairly linear opening section and a more open hotel area to explore. Interactivity is about what you would see in early games in the genre, such as finding a key item and using it in the appropriate place, although I do appreciate that these interactive points bring up a quick selection menu for key items. Weapon aiming did feel stiff, especially with the knife, and it's surprising that there's no quick weapon swap control. There's only one type of enemy you do encounter, and one logic puzzle for you to solve. You can unlock a shotgun to use, but the enemies are generally easy enough to avoid unless you're in a very narrow space. I don't have too much else to say about Scarlet Lake at this point, but the demo says there's a lot more that will be offered upon release, so I would like to see more before jumping completely on board. Poem Ex Machina by Omri Dangreo features parkour and rail grinding gameplay for its platforming sections and a separate switchable mode for combat situations. There is an investigation and boss sequence in the demo, although I do feel like these could use a bit more fleshing out. The parkour/rail grinding mode known as Tricks mode seems to be the furthest along, as you get a mix of combat abilities that combine with the platforming, whereas the combat or Pugilot mode gives you a 2-button combat control scheme combo system with a meter that fills for a special attack. Keep in mind that there is a bit of getting used to for both stances. The investigation sequence was probably the simplest part of the demo, with me just going around looking for clues in a more limited environment. The boss fight was more involved by having 3 phases that needed me to switch between the Tricks and Pugilot stances, but the final phase definitely needs work. I did feel like some of the gameplay came off as disjointed, but that may be the case that it just needs that bit of fleshing out, as the separate gameplay sequences aren't bad in themselves. I think there's potential for something that could appeal to a lot of people in Poem Ex Machina, as it also features a glimpse to its more exploratory aspect to it, so I wouldn't mind seeing another demo with more polish later on. For those looking for a classic point-and-click adventure game, Neojunk City by Starblade Games should be on your radar. The demo already offers a good amount of environmental interaction, and its cyberpunk setting and story starts you off pretty early with a fairly interactive investigation. The demo isn't too long, but does also throw in shooting sequences that are both story-based and seemingly randomized in a certain section. There's also a training driving sequence to test, although I really wish there was at least one more of these. The demo itself just felt very well paced, as there were other parts available that did have me explore, interact with characters, some puzzles to solve, and some occasions to make decisions. There's no official controller support at this time, so I don't know if that'll sway anyone's decision, but considering that this is basically a point-and-click adventure game, I don't expect that to change anytime soon. But if the full game can keep up the same level of pace as the demo, I think this can be a really strong release for point-and-click adventure game fans. Post Trauma by Red Soul Games has been on my wishlist for a while, so it was nice to see the demo available for NextFest. For those who feel like survival horror is at its best with fixed camera angles and a character who doesn't seem like they're professionally trained for combat, Post Trauma is setting itself to be the evolution of that philosophy. While the puzzles I've seen so far make use of the environment itself as a part of the clues to observe, they might seem a little obtuse depending on how your logic works. Nevertheless, I was invested to get through as much of the demo as possible. Unfortunately, due to some computer problems I ran into on my end, I wasn't able to complete the demo, but from what I've played, Post Trauma is seemingly bringing in this classic solo survival horror into the modern age in a way that others haven't been quite been able to. It is scheduled for release at the end of March, so hopefully it'll scratch that itch for survival horror fans looking for an evolution of that style. Ghost End is a side-scrolling Metroidvania with some RPG elements by Hand Production LLC. Though the demo starts you off in a flash-forward dragonflight battle sequence, that does get followed by a side-scrolling sequence where it looks like you have most of your late-game abilities. Completing this part of the demo puts you into the Metroidvania beginning, where you're depowered with the earliest ability you gain being your Ghost Hand to grab objects and certain enemies with. You're also granted some abilities by default that you don't always start with in a Metroidvania, like a double jump, slide, and wall jump. In writing, it sounds pretty nice to have those mobility options so early, but some things just don't feel that well executed, like the intro dragonflight combat sequence, the awkward momentum-based movement system, and the wall jumping that just sometimes feels clunky. I'm also pretty sure that I was soft-locked on one boss twice, and another one that I was eventually able to defeat despite some other circumstances. All that aside, the maps in the demo had a lot to explore. There is an equipment system that does offer visual customization, the pixel art style is nicely handled, and animations are well done, so hopefully the issues I've seen can be ironed out before a new demo or its full release. I added the Knightling by Turban to my wishlist after seeing the Steam demo trailer, mostly because of the combat featured in it. While I don't feel like the demo allowed access to a lot of the combat abilities I wanted to try, which you can see as unlockable in the skill tree, it was still a good preview of other things it has to offer. It's looking to be a fairly open action adventure game with a good amount of platforming and combat. I'm not sure how many quests are available in the demo, but one that I've tried felt bigger than what I thought it would be at the start, and the other was meant to focus on one of your combat abilities. Combat does feel responsive, and your shield does have properties based on timing, but like I said, it feels like it was intended to be limited for the demo, or that the demo itself was supposed to be more focused on other things. So, for the open world displayed, I didn't explore all of it, but it is pretty large. But it's also designed to have multiple or convenient ways to traverse it, at least around the castle town area. Your shield slide ability can be used on hills and on the massive waterway, and there were ways to scale the height next to the water mills. Characters exhibit a lot of emotion with their expressions through animation, despite that everyone I've interacted with had some sort of mask or face covering. It's looking to be a pretty solid title, and if you're looking for an open world that's more colorful, then the Knightling should be one to keep an eye out for. Kafkaesque The Nightmare Trial is a third-person survival horror title by Dawn Fades. This does lean more in the psychological horror spectrum and features a controllable camera. Graphically, it's pretty minimalistic, but I had no real trouble navigating areas due to that. It's seeming to mostly follow the classic survival horror formula of finding a key item then using it when it's applicable, but a few other puzzles and notes are also featured. There's also some item management to balance in the demo. There was a decent amount of exploration I was able to do, and you do have a number of collectibles you can find for your shelf in your room, but there's not much else I can say about it. One thing that irked me was how much the camera zooms in while aiming with the weapon. The story page says it'll be available in April, so I'll wait to see if there's more to it before release. Inayah Life After Gods, being developed by Exogenesis Studios, is a 2D action platformer with Metroidvania elements. While you start off with a pretty limited moveset like most Metroidvanias, by the end of the demo you do gain access to the 3 available and instantly switchable weapons. Each one has some pretty extensive skill trees, and while that caught my attention, it was something else that really grabbed my notice. In the demo, equipping your sword grants you a quick mid or height boost when swinging up, your flail lets you hold onto specific posts almost like a mid-air ledge grab, while the fists let you climb up certain walls. And I'm honestly not sure how I feel about that. I'm far more used to seeing necessary traversal mechanics being tied directly as central accessible abilities, and while there is an implant system that does seem to have equipable traversal abilities, those seem to be more supplemental. It's not much of an issue in the demo, as there aren't areas that seem to depend heavily on the switching mechanic for basic traversal, but it feels distracting to me. Though that's really more of a me problem, and Inayah looks to be a pretty high quality title in the production department. Besides the large skill trees for the weapons, there are equipable upgrades, and the 2D artwork is amazing along with its animated cutscenes. The game is set to release in late March, so let me know if you're interested. According to the story page, Lunarium is a fantasy action RPG, although from what I've played, it shares more in common with other types of action games. Developed by Team Lunarium, you play in an isometric view, and most of your time is spent in combat or exploration, which can be pretty simple. Go up to something and see if it offers any sort of interaction, or bash objects with your sword and automatically collect what's there. Combat starts off almost as simple: attack an enemy with your sword, dodge, or parry their attack when you find the right timing. It gets much more involved when you gain a partner for your adventure. This actually adds a timing and resource structure to many of your battle actions. Not all of your partner abilities are available for purchase in one playthrough of the demo, so I didn't take the time to fully learn the timing of all moves, but I think that's important to note for a couple of reasons. One reason is that unlike some of the other demos I played, the skill tree for Lunarium looks relatively small. This isn't a guarantee that the game is short or that all abilities shown in the demo are what would be in the release, but it's something I noticed. The second reason is why I said that this spars more from other action games instead of ARPGs. Unlike RPGs, I didn't see an experience or level up system. Instead, I gained 2 types of light currency that you use to buy combat abilities. Also, the only stacking I saw was by improving my weapon through an NPC who lets you upgrade your attack with the distinct items I discovered while exploring. So far, I don't really feel like Lunarium needs any extensive RPG elements, as I think the partner combat abilities and upgrades are fine enough, but I figured it was worth mentioning. It's looking very polished in the art department, and the gameplay feels pretty responsive with a decent amount of depth in the enemy and boss encounters I played through. I'm looking forward to seeing more of it in the future. Stone, currently being developed by Heijing Shi, is a 3D action-adventure Metroidvania, and while my impression of the game for its first few minutes was that everything feels floaty, yes, even the basic run speed, Stone was one of my favorite demos from NextFest. The first few puzzles after getting the first transformation, the spider, immediately had me invested. These weren't super complicated or difficult to figure out, but so much of it just felt like a good starting point of what Stone has to offer. The demo puts you into a largely interconnected dungeon that really nails the 3D Metroidvania description. The new abilities you gain are what allows you access to new or previous areas where you couldn't make progress before, rather than just beating a boss or collecting keys. The combat isn't great and can feel worse with the few flying enemies I came across, but it is serviceable and you can collect equipable stones to augment basic combat stats. But combat doesn't really feel like the main focus anyway. Even if you do gain abilities that can be used for it, I wasn't looking for something that makes combat better, but that next ability to see if it was what I needed somewhere else. Exploration and using your abilities to progress like a Metroidvania seems to be Stone's main goal, and I'm glad I didn't pass it up, and I hope more people decide to add this to their wishlist like I did. Twilight Monk by Aquatic Moon Games blends 2D action platforming with side-scrolling Metroidvania and RPG elements, but one of my favorite things I learned from the demo is how it adds an old-school interconnected RPG overworld to connect all of its areas together. The combat in the demo works well enough. Your main weapon is an enchanted pillar that you can place down and attack without it, or use it in other offensive ways, and you'll also gain access to weapons that use energy, but there wasn't a lot of depth in the combat itself. The dungeons have puzzles that require exploration, combat, and platforming to pass just like you'd expect it to, and the RPG elements I've witnessed in the demo were pretty light. But already from the demo, you get the feel of old-school RPG exploration. This includes town areas to visit, overworld enemies appearing that puts you into a randomized battle arena when they make contact, and how other areas are connected together. Its inclusion of an old-school RPG overworld gives me that sense of nostalgia that a lot of games go for, yet there is more to the Twilight Monk demo than what it brought up, like its great art style, and how large its world map looks like it can expand, but I'll wait for a full release before going more into it than this. Well, those are my general impressions of everything I played that was available for NextFest. Let me know if there's anything I missed, anything you want me to go more into detail for, anything you agree or disagree with. Thanks. Bye.